It is being monitored, so we will keep track of the chat, and it will be recorded so that we will have the information following this event. We will also be conducting polls. Shortly, we will do a couple practice polls just to get a sense of who's here. Those polls are anonymous. They do not record who is answering or how people are answering questions. They're a lot of fun. So next. Just really quickly, technical guidelines. If you are having trouble with your and need technical assistance, type tech help in the chat. We will monitor it and we will have someone get in touch with you. In addition, please note that there is closed captioning available. There should be at the bottom of your screen a closed caption icon that will allow you to show subtitles or hide them. In addition, there is simultaneous interpretation being offered in Mandarin. So please feel free to press on the interpretation icon and choose the language that you would like to listen to the presentation in. I will also note that the chat can be visible by everyone, and that can be helpful in terms of conversations and things like that. So welcome to everyone, and we look forward to hearing your ideas and your thoughts. And I'm going to turn this over to Chris Herbert, my co-chair for the Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee.
Thank you, Sarah, and welcome everyone. It's great to see so many people here in attendance. If you could show the next slide, Amanda. To get us oriented tonight, what I'd like to do is first talk about what it is we're talking about tonight, which is we're talking about an update to Lexington's comprehensive plan. So what is a comprehensive plan? Well, first of all, it's important to understand this is required by state law as part of the process of having zoning. Each community is responsible for specifying a comprehensive plan, sometimes referred to as a master plan. Lexington last updated its plan in 2003, so in many respects, we're overdue for such an update. And these updates are done to take into account both changing context in the town, what's changed over time, and changing images of where the town wants to go. And so importantly, on the second bullet here, it is that the comprehensive plan is a visionary document, which is intended to guide a town's decisions about land use. So the comprehensive plan is really about the built environment. If you click next slide, I think it'll show you the next box on that slide. And so what the plan is, it's used as a basis for decision-making for future development. It's a process leading to a plan of action based on a town's shared values and goals. And it's a set of priorities for issues to be addressed through the built environment. So this is not a document that gets into specific changes, but it's then used to inform for the planning department for whom the plan is provided, a roadmap, as it were, for the direction the town wants to go. If you show the next slide, Amanda, I want to highlight the fact that the town, this process of developing the comprehensive plan is being guided by 7 principles. And these principles are that we envision ourselves as an accessible and connected community, a livable community, a healthy and socially responsible community, a vital and resilient economy. We're in harmony with nature. We exhibit and practice good governance, and we have a commitment to equity. And so these are the principles that go into shaping the plan. And the plan itself, though, has 8 specific goals. And so the next slide shows you these 8 goals. They're in these little balloons that are hard to read, but they relate to, first of all, to increasing the diversity of the town, to provide and maintain recreation facilities and places for community gathering, to promote economic development, protect the environment, acknowledge and respect historic and natural resources, to provide state-of-the-art public facilities, to make getting around in the town safe with efficient transportation, and last but not least, to provide a range of housing options. And so while the comprehensive plan will take into account all of these goals, tonight, based on feedback we received at a public forum in June, we wanted to have a specific conversation about housing. And so we look at the next slide. If we drill into that goal, the goal is to provide on housing a wide range of housing options. And as sub goals under that, this includes, as we've started to frame it, to increase the supply of housing attainable by a wide range of incomes and for all stages of the life cycle, to increase the supply of housing oriented to older adults, and to preserve the existing stock of modest homes in town. And in many respects, this is a starting point for the conversation we hope to have tonight. If you go to the, skip one slide, go to 2 slides from now, Amanda. So just to focus on the purpose of today's forum. So first of all, we want to raise awareness of housing issues. We've had a number, as part of this comprehensive planning process, a number of public forums, a number of ways which we've gotten feedback. And one of the things that will be coming out is an inventory of housing conditions. And so tonight, part of our time will be spent sharing that understanding of housing issues in the town. But more importantly, we really want to start to focus the conversation on discussing alternative strategies from other communities, that things that Lexington can look to, and also provide you opportunities to consider and propose potential strategies. So this forum tonight is really a chance to engage the community in this discussion about what the strategy should be for Lexington in the area of housing. If you go up one slide, Amanda, just in terms of the cast of characters. So the comprehensive plan is something that is the responsibility of the planning department. As part of this process, the planning department has created and appointed members to the CPAC, which is the Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee. So this consists of 12 residents of the town who are listed here, most of whom are in attendance here tonight. One way for you to also have input into this plan is to reach out to the folks on this list that you know and share with them your vision of the town and what you hope to see embodied in this comprehensive plan. We're joined here tonight. We'll hear from Daphne Politis and Martha Lyon, who are consultants engaged by the town. And we also have town staff, Carol Kowalowski, Amanda Loomis, and Molly Belanger, who have been very much a part of this process. Actually not listed here, and quite important as well, are liaisons from the planning department, Melanie Thompson. We have liaisons from the select board, Joe Pato and Mark Sandine, and also from the school committee, Kathleen Lanahan. And so those folks have also been an important part of this process. If you go to the next slide and skip one, I think, because I jumped ahead. I also want to direct your attention to Lexington Next. I should say that this comprehensive plan has been branded Lexington Next. This is the next Lexington that we want to help bring into being. And so if you go to the website here, lexingtonnext.org, you can get information about the comprehensive plan, about the CPAC members and the like. And importantly, it's also a place for you to begin to share your ideas, to share your reactions to both the documents that are being presented and the ideas that we're starting to create. And importantly, I want to draw your attention in particular to this My Social Pinpoint website that's here. And we'll describe this again later in the meeting, which is a website that's created for that kind of interaction where you can go post a comment, look at what other people have posted and react to it. So I really hope, having seen so many of you here tonight, that this isn't the end of the conversation, but in many respects, the beginning of the conversation. So we go to the next slide, just to quickly run through the agenda for tonight's meeting. Did we skip the agenda? Well, oh no, we're not doing the agenda yet. I'm sorry, we are going to the polls. So I'm jumping ahead of myself. Let me pass it back to Sarah Felton. Sarah, you were going to do some of those warm-up polls.
Yeah, I think that the warm-up polls are intended to get an idea of who's here with us tonight. Can you go to the next slide, Amanda? So that's sort of where we are. We're starting with how old you are, and that's, oh dear. Okay, we changed the order here. We could start with the who lives in a single family.
I can jump right to the other one. Hold on a second.
Sorry about that.
Okay, you should be able to see it.
To get a sense in terms of who's here, in terms of age, and just click on the age group that makes sense for you, and we'll monitor those, sort of the percentage of those response. Again, the polls are anonymous, so they don't have any identifying information that goes with them. So that's awesome. It looks like we have a couple people under the age of 30, which is great, and a nice cohort of people in the 60 to 80 range, which is just really great. Thank you all for responding. The next poll, I think, is what type of housing do you currently reside in? And that will come up momentarily. There we go. Oh, I didn't see the poll come up. Did it come up for, I hope it came up for folks.
You know, it's possible, Sarah, that because it was pulled up, it was closed. So we may have to skip that one.
Oh, okay.
I
Okay.
see it. I see it. Oh,
But it was the results. It wasn't.
no, it was the poll.
Oh, I don't know, Amanda. Okay, there it is again. There we go. Survey says. How about your Vanna White, Sarah?
Oh,
Or
there
whoever
it is. So majority single family and 31% owner occupied, a few multifamily and a few rentals. And the next poll. And what gender do you identify as? And someone on the chat has pointed out that there may be more than one person watching on the same computer. We don't have a way of sort of capturing that, but hopefully we can get a sort of general idea of who's here. But 62% female, 32% male, 6% prefer not to say. Thank you. And do you currently have children in the Lexington schools? The majority of people do not have children in the Lexington schools. It's always hard to attend these evening events, I think, when you have young children. Thank you all for responding to the polls. It's helpful to us to just get an idea of who is coming to the event. Next slide. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Sarah, and it speaks to some of the issues that we're focused on in the comprehensive plan in terms of preponderance of single family and owner occupied, the fact the age distribution of the town. It also speaks to the challenge that we face as a CPAC in trying to get more engagement. So please tell your younger friends, tell your people with kids in the schools to check out that Lexington website so we can make sure we hear from everybody in town as part of this process.
Apparently there are back to school events tonight.
Oh,
One person who attends Lexington Public Schools, it's representing the teen voice tonight.
what's the next slide? Ah, it's back to me. So this is the agenda for tonight. So we're finishing up the introduction. We're about to go to the housing overview, which I believe Martha Lyon will present. We'll talk about affordable housing in Lexington, which Liz Rust, who I'll introduce in a second, will present housing types, which I can't remember if it's Daphne or it is Daphne. And then housing regulations and strategies, our guest Judy Barrett will discuss. And then we'll have hopefully leave plenty of time for questions and answers. And importantly, at the end of the night, we'll have a raffle for fabulous prizes that were quite popular after our June event. So, so stick around for that. So one more slide, I think, where I can just give a fuller introduction to our guest. So Elizabeth Russ, who's the director of the Regional Housing Services Office. And Liz, maybe you can say a bit about that. She's an important partner of Lexington's. And then Judy Barrett, who's the principal of Barrett Planning Group. Judy is one of the really preeminent practitioners in the field of housing in the Boston area. So we're really pleased to have her with us here tonight. So let me turn it over to you, Martha, to take it away on the housing overview. And you're on mute.
Thank you, Chris and Sarah, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in tonight on this very important topic. My job in this is to give you all an introduction to the conditions of housing in Lexington as we are today. But I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of preview or review of the background on housing and how it developed over time. Amanda, please, the next slide. Amanda?
Is it not advancing?
It's not advancing on my screen.
Uh-oh.
I can talk while you're doing that. As many of you know, Lexington started out as a very small agricultural community. It was actually called Cambridge Farms originally in the 1600s. And in 1713, it became its own town, but it continued throughout much of the 1700s as a rural agricultural logging community. In the beginning of the 19th century, a couple of things happened that started to change the face of Lexington, and as a result, its housing patterns. First of all, there was a bridge connected to Boston over the Charles River, and that allowed things that were being made or could be made in Lexington to be shipped to Boston and vice versa. So it attracted a larger population, and commercial development began to spring up along some of the major roadways. And so what you see if you look at old maps from the 1800s is you see housing scattered or clustered, I should say, along the major roadways like Massachusetts Avenue and some of the other ones. And that's how the housing patterns really existed during much of the 19th century. But by the end of the 19th century, the railroad had come, and in 1900, the streetcar really had a big impact in the sense that it allowed people to commute. And Lexington was on its way to being a streetcar suburb, a suburb of Boston. And what that meant is that a lot of housing developed. Now, most of the housing, a very large portion of the housing developed right after the Second World War. There was a boom, and between 1940 and 1970, there were 6,000 housing units added to this town. So that's about 200 housing units a year. It's quite a bit. So the town really burgeoned as a suburb. And in the years following that, after 1970, there was continual sort of steady growth, but it was a lot slower. And in the last decades, it's again continued to increase, but slowly. I'm just going to keep talking because we have a lot to get through tonight. So I'm sorry there are no images for anybody to look through. Hopefully you can imagine in your head. Today, residential development takes up a very large portion of land in Lexington. It's about over 42%. And that doesn't seem like a lot, although land in Lexington is used obviously for a lot of things, such as non-taxable open space, roadways, etc. But just in comparison, only about 4.5% of land is used for commercial, and just over 2% of it is used for industrial. Almost 40% of the land is occupied by single-family homes alone. Single-family detached homes make up 76% of the dwelling units in the town, and rental units only account for about 18%. So it's very, very heavily a residential community. And just by contrast, the neighboring Waltham and Arlington, both about 20% of their housing is devoted to buildings that have 10 units or more. So Lexington is quite in contrast to that. And we have our first poll. If you go to slide 21, that will get you there. Amanda? And the first poll question is, what percentage of Lexington's houses have 3 or more bedrooms? Let's see how many people can guess this. What percentage have 3 or more bedrooms? And Amanda, you could advance the slide as well. We're on the next. You can. And I think you probably can show the tally if it's available.
And I will jump to, I just didn't want to mess anything up, to have anything crash again.
Okay, that's okay. I understand technology difficulties. So the correct answer is 75%. So a lot of you got this right. It's actually a little over 75%. 75 is close enough. Okay. Can you advance, Amanda, or should I just keep talking? Next slide, please. Okay, there we go. Great. So in 2019, Lexington had 12,154 units of housing. That has increased a little bit per the 2020 census, although not an appreciable amount. But 97% of those units were occupied, excuse me. And I was going to say, Lexington has 3 high occupancy items. One is 97% of units were occupied, 82% of units were owner occupied, and 83% of units were single family. And I think there was a chat question about, isn't the same thing as owner occupied? Isn't owner occupied the same thing as occupied? Not necessarily, because some houses obviously are rentals. The median value of owner-occupied units was almost $900,000, and median means half above and half below this amount. And you can see where on this image at the very bottom in green, where the numbers fall. But 23% of those units were valued at over $1 million. Next, please. Next poll. What was Lexington's mean, which is average, home selling price in the last 12 months? And I have to thank Rich McDonough for this one. Okay, I think we can probably tally. Okay, so the answer to this is actually 1.614,165. So it's quite high. Next slide, please. What has happened in the last several years is that as land that is vacant and possibly available for additional housing has become scarcer and scarcer. There is still some available, but it's become scarce. And so what has happened is developers and owners have begun buying homes, mostly those smaller homes built after World War II, and demolishing them. And those are called teardowns. It's a teardown project. And next poll, please. How much larger by percentage are new houses, ones that are built, than those being replaced through tearing down? And for those of you who attended the last forum, this question was asked there too. So maybe you remember the answer, maybe not. I think we can do the tally, Amanda. Okay, I think there maybe some people cheated because they were at the last, but yes, it's correct, 258%. So the majority of you got that right. Let's look a little bit about households next. Households comprised of 4 or more people are the most common in Lexington, about a third. And families make up 80% of all households. So that means that 20% of the households are occupied by single persons living alone. And 60% of those persons are over the age of 65. So a lot of seniors are, the single household population is largely seniors. Next. Amanda? Are we stuck? We have another poll. Okay. I'll read the question. What percentage of Lexington's households include children between the ages of 6 and 17? And a lot of people ask this question. I had to get our resident mathematician to get the correct answer for me because I didn't want to get this wrong tonight. Okay. I think we can show the tally. Okay, so 55.2 is correct. Thank you. Next slide. As part of the work that my colleague Daphne Politis and I undertook as part of this process was to interview many members of the Lexington community who represent boards, commissions, town employees, nonprofit organizations that have an interest in some aspect of life in Lexington. And housing was a theme. We did have a specific stakeholder session that focused just on housing, but I have to say, and I think Daphne would agree with me, that even though the focus of our discussion might have not intended to be housing, I think it emerged in a lot of the conversations we had with the stakeholders. So these are some of the themes that came out of those interviews, and we did them in the late spring and just a few more a couple weeks ago. There's a lack of variety of housing types and a significant loss of moderately priced housing. And then also a need for housing for older adults and empty nesters, for starter homes, so people who are buying their first home, for disabled individuals who may have special needs, special accommodations that need to be made for being able to get around, for lower income families, and then for town staff. This came up a lot of individuals who work in town who maybe are in the police force or are paramedics or teachers have a difficult time affording housing in Lexington. Also, there's an opportunity to provide housing above retail in some of the commercial areas, and especially the center. And it was observed that the size of houses currently is tied to the size of lots. So setbacks and floor area ratios are what determine often how large a house will be. And then Liz is going to talk about this next one in great detail, so I'm not going to say much about it, but that the state calculates Lexington's subsidized housing inventory at 11.2%. That's the recorded number of total units. So 11.2% of the total number of housing units. But the actual inventory is closer to 5.5%. And she will explain that to you. So it's far below the state's desired threshold of 10%. Next. And just to review some of the changes since the last comprehensive plan, which Chris mentioned was completed in 2003. There was the successful establishment of the Lexington Housing Partnership, which is an advocacy group appointed by the Select Board for Advocacy for Affordable Housing in Lexington. The Community Preservation Act was passed in 2006. And thus far, an allocation of over $11 million has been made to support community housing. It seems like a lot of money. That is actually only 14% of the total community preservation allocation for the town. So it's some, but it's not a great amount. Housing has been allowed in business districts, including upper story apartments. There's been a major redevelopment of the existing housing stock. And then many of you realize there's been a significant demographic change, particularly increase in certain populations, aging population, young children, and then of course, an increase in median income. And finally, I wanted to just touch on a couple of items that we have just suspected as the result of COVID. Next slide, Amanda. Well, obviously, there's been increased interest in use of open space trails. People are getting out and enjoying the fresh air, are devoting a little bit more time to fitness, which is just great. At least in the short run, suburbs are seen as more desirable, and that's adding heat to an already hot housing market. There's also a potential for increased housing cost burden, which Liz and Judy will explain, for residents who have experienced a pause in employment or maybe have lost a job. And there's possibly an increased need in additional housing space to accommodate a labor workforce that is working remotely. So that gives you a snapshot of what is going on with housing, was historically and today. And I am going to now turn it over to Liz Rust, who is going to talk with you about the affordable housing situation in more detail. Liz.
Yes, hi. Hi, everybody. I'm really glad to be here. I'm Liz Rust. I'm the director of the Regional Housing Services Office. And next slide, please. Oh, I think it starts with the poll. So we have a little introduction for what the Regional Housing Services Office is after the poll. So we'll just sort of kick this off. And so this is a pre-poll for what you might hear in my presentation. So how many housing units in Lexington have affordability restrictions? And why don't you pick what you think the answer might be there? And there we go. So 31%, 22 of the 70 who voted, right on target with the 766. So, so very good. Next slide, please. So here's the Regional Housing Services Office. So we're an organization, a municipal collaboration, regional collaboration between these 9 communities. Lexington was one of the founding members and one of the driving founding members back in 2011. So I've been working with the town for, I guess, going on 10 years. And these are the other regional municipalities that are part of the group. And so we're very happy to help Lexington with all manners of affordable housing. We are housing practitioners, so we really get into the weeds. And so my part of the presentation will be a little bit more technical detail for some of the, compared to some of the other information, but it provides a good baseline for what is the affordable housing in Lexington. Next slide, please. So just 3 baseline terms. I mean, we could have a couple of pages on this, but when we talk about affordable housing, there's really 2 kinds. There's small a and capital A. So small a is when housing costs are less than 30% of household income. That's the general affordability calculus. If you're spending more than 30% of your household income on housing, you're known to, not known, but it's called being cost burdened, that you are spending more than what's considered, like what a bank would consider, or what the affordable housing programs would consider. And housing is considered affordable with a capital A if there's a restriction on the property. So when we talk about affordable housing, at least when I talk about affordable housing from my lens, I'm usually talking about the capital A. Because we're looking for restrictions on the property, restrictions that would preserve the affordability into the future, preserves the units, be they home ownership or rental units, to preserve them into affordable to the new buyers and renters. So that's one piece. So then we have the area median income and income limits. So these are the technical details, the technical figures that provide the limits for who would be eligible for affordable housing. They are published annually by HUD, and the area median income, AMI. Now we could think that an area median income, I think that was in the chat, would be the median in Lexington. But in this context, in these capital AMI, is the area median income in the Boston, Cambridge, Quincy area, which is where Lexington is. And it contains all the municipalities in Suffolk, Norfolk, Middlesex, Essex, and Plymouth counties. So it's a very large area. And in 2021, the area median income for this area is $120,800. So that's the AMI. Also, we use income limits, and income limits are derived from that, not always arithmetically because it's HUD and they have a very complicated formula. Some people call it the 80%, the low income limits that really defines a lot of eligibility. So when people are looking to move in, they're often presented with income limits that their income would need to be below, and those are those income limits. We also talk some about the subsidized housing inventory, or the SHI, and Martha talked about that before. And this is the official measure of a community stock of affordable housing. That should really be a capital A, affordable housing for the purposes of Chapter 40B as maintained by DHCD. DHCD is the Department of Housing and Community Development. They run the housing programs for the state. And I think we'll go to the next slide. Which will talk about what the SHI, or the subsidized housing inventory, can do. Again, this is a one-page, very brief 40B, safe harbor. These are complicated terms that many people have written lots of papers about, and I'm sure you've heard some of that. There are two 40B processes I wanted to mention. One is mass housing, and then there's DHCD. So we have a friendly 40B, and we have a mass housing. So that's just really two paths. Sometimes when you hear friendly 40B, you wonder, is it the same 40B? And in fact, it is. Communities that are over that 10% SHI threshold, so we talked about that before, this would be 10% of your housing units are restricted with the capital A. You are in safe harbor, and that means that you can approve or deny a 40B permit. So Lexington has 11.18%. As far as I've been working with Lexington for these 10 years, Lexington has always been above the 10%. And in fact, it went above the 10% in 2003 with the Avalon Met State. So next slide. Yep, thank you. In order to count on the SHI, the unit must have a formal affordable housing restriction. So that's a restriction that's placed on the land. It's formally recorded. It is a title item. Like if you look at the registry of deeds on the property, you would see that. And there's 20 pages of legal protections for that housing restriction. It must be affordable to households earning less than 80% of the AMI. Those are those income limits I talked about. And the sales price or rent is set at no more than 30% of a household income. So again, making sure that it's not going to housing burden and cost burden the individual, and must be marketed through an approved affirmative fair housing marketing plan. So just that's the criteria. And not all restrictions meet this criteria. You can see that some of those might be high bars. And in fact, Lexington has 88 restricted units that are not on the SHI. So it's not the end all be all, but it has its very specific requirements. Next slide, please. So this slide just shows the different ways that affordable housing is created in Lexington. So Lexington has, as we saw before with Martha's information, 1335 affordable units. Again, that's capital A, recorded on the state's SHI. And these are created under different housing programs. So we have the mass housing 40B, so 27% of those units, and they are there, those small bullets, maybe you can see them. We have the friendly 40B, so there's a few of those there. We have the local action units, and these are units that are created through the inclusionary zoning or special permits. So there's a number of those there, 30%. And then there's a lot of other state financing programs, the housing authority and other. So, so just to give you an idea that it's, there's not just one housing program that creates the affordable housing in Lexington. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's all the numbers. I had spent my whole morning tick and tying all my numbers here. And I don't expect to you to fully, appreciate all this, but we'll put these out here anyway. Anyway, the 1335 units on the SHI, so that's 11.19. Of those, they have a mechanism where you can count market rate units on the SHI if you meet certain conditions. And that was an incentive to have rental housing developed out in the suburbs. And it worked. So, so there's a lot of 40B rental properties out in the suburbs, including Lexington. And you can see here that 657 units of those 1335 are actually market rate units, like on Avalon and what have you. So you have 678 restricted units on the SHI. So in that next black box, right? So we add the 18 units that I mentioned before, that you have 18 restricted units that are not on the SHI. So when we look at the total restricted universe in Lexington, it's actually 766. So, and that those are, LexHab has some of those, and then the Muzzy School, if you're familiar with the properties in this affordable housing universe. And so then of those, 93 of them are ownership units, and 673 of them are rental units. And of the rental units, you can see it's very hard to see the key there, but the blue is age restricted, so that's 36%. The orange is non-age restricted or family. We sort of stay away from the family word because that sort of conjures children and what have you. So it's really non-age restricted. And then 13 are more specialized, so group homes.
Liz,
So that-
not to interrupt, but there are two. One is that someone is appreciating this a lot and asking if the slides will be available. And yes, of course they will be, but also a question to you. If the unit is owned by the person that lives in it, how does it become affordable housing or a restricted unit?
In those cases, the unit was restricted prior to the person purchasing the unit, is how that works. And they purchase it with the deed restriction on it, and they are obligated to live in the unit as their primary residence. And when they sell it, most often the resale price is restricted to keep it affordable in perpetuity. Those are the current requirements. There are some older deed restrictions that don't work quite like that, but that's how most of the newer things work. Next slide, please. So how about what's been happening in Lexington? So over the last almost 10 years, Lexington created a net of 3 units in that time, though actually created 29 units, 10 of them private, that would be through the inclusionary zoning mechanisms, and public 19, so that would be like the Housing Authority, LexHab, and with local funding for all those units, and lost 26 units or beds in group homes. So it was a net gain of 3. So, it's just too bad, right? Like I don't know what to say there, except for that's just an interesting piece to look at. The group homes, these are homes and beds operated and managed through the Department of Social Services and the Department of, something else.
Mental health.
Thank you. Mental health, right? The addresses and the living and the counting in particular of those is confidential. And we don't know where they are. The town is not able to control or manage those. And when the new SHI reports come from DHCD, the number just changes. So they get reported in through those state agencies and get reported back and counted for Lexington. And I think back, so now the total number I think is like 67. So it varies somewhat, but over this last 10 years, 26 were lost. The SHI denominator, I think someone asked this in the chat, though it's hard to talk and look at the chat at the same time, will be recalibrated shortly. I think maybe at the end of the month, we're expecting. Lexington will stay above the 10%, and we're waiting to see the final numbers to see just how much, but there's no danger in falling below the 10%. An upcoming pipeline includes both SHI and non-SHI moderate income units. You might recall from a prior slide that to be counting on the SHI, you have to be under that 80% AMI or low income. So the moderate or workforce housing or housing created for the missing middle is another term people use, are great for the community, but don't count on the SHI. So Emerson Garden, I think it's really Lexington Meadows is its other name. There's one moderate income unit there, and that's under construction. Fairlane has one moderate income unit that is permitted, and I don't think it's under construction. And then there's these two other, which will create SHI units. So that's just the pipeline that I know. So there's always things happening. Housing takes a long time. Thank you, Fairlane Street, yeah. Oh, Fairland, sorry, yeah, thank you. Housing takes a long time to create in terms of when people actually move in, right? So you hear about the project gets shopped around and proposed, talk around in town, that probably maybe even takes a year, you go through permitting, then they get their financing, then they go through their construction, and then finally, you know, maybe it's 5 years, maybe a little bit longer, depending on the complexity. You know, people move in and you would get credit for them if they're on the SHI, or at least you'd know that you would be housing the people that it was intended for. Yeah, so the Jefferson, those were included in, I'm just responding to the chat, right? So the Jefferson Grove, I think it was called, those were part of the 10 private units that were created in the last 10 years. There were 3 units there. Next slide, please. So in terms of, so that's it for the, you know, the detailed numbers part of the housing inventory. So if we look at who's involved, who are the housing resources in terms of people and entities? So, you know, we have CPA, which is critical. There's the Housing Authority. There's LexHab, of course, zoning. There's us, and we assist the town staff. So municipal resources. So the housing partnership and town staff, the private property owners play a key role, not only in terms of development housing, but they own and operate affordable housing. So making sure that things, that they're in compliance and that they're treating their tenants fairly and charging appropriate rents and what have you. And then there's the Home Consortium, which is another regional organization that's managed and administered out of Newton, and Lexington's part of that and receives some affordable housing funds through the Home Consortium. So that is, you know, someone just asked, there are 97 people attendees on the call, just to throw that in there. So the next slide, please. So in terms of housing entities, this is a slide, there was a much longer presentation, but I just picked out this one slide for what I call the Lexington development strategy. So Lexington has done a lot of analysis, thanks to Carol Kowalski, to put together a proposal to add an affordable housing trust. You can see there in that middle blimp, and then a Lexington Housing Development Corporation down below, 2 new entities in the housing landscape to really increase capacity and further production. These were driven somewhat by the top rectangle, which is development and building permit transfer fees. Now, these I think are ideas that have been proposed through town meeting and might be in varying states of definition and advancement. But Lexington also has other sources of local funds, like through, I'm going to forget its name. Sorry. And all my mother's friends live there. So Brookhaven, sorry. Anyway, so, you know, they provided some funds to Lexington, and the idea is to have a affordable housing trust to looking as a funding mechanism, and a Lexington Housing Development Corporation to construct and develop housing. These are both going forward into additional exploration, and I believe the select board voted last week the charge to authorize a task force to fully or more further explore these two concepts and to bring them to public review and perhaps eventual town meeting. So that's a huge capacity builder for affordable housing, and a model that I know that many communities will be eager to see how Lexington's doing it and to pave the way. And next slide. And this is, so other municipal strategies, you know, I see a lot of different things happen in different towns. And I, you know, wanted to just to throw out some ideas. You know, in terms of, I think that there's really 4 areas for strategies. One is to build capacity, which we just talked about with the Trust Housing Corporation. Also in here, you have LexHab and the Housing Authority, and assisting building capacity within those organizations. There's utilizing funding, and you know, you have here the CPA, there are home funds that might be tapped into, and other local or state funds. Unit creation, you might look at the permit decisions and focus on the affordable units and their definition, and of course, promoting unit creation. And then increase opportunity and access. And so this is really a key area to advocate, expand outreach and communication, and make sure that the word gets out on all that is going on and all that is available in town. Next slide, please. And this is, I think, my last slide. So in summary, so Lexington has active housing efforts and resources, and municipal initiatives have great potential to provide new opportunities. So I see a lot of positive things going on, and not to ever diminish the role of local advocates who can really increase housing efforts across the board. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Liz, for that. Good evening. I'm Daphne Politis. I'm a town planner. I also happen to be a resident of Lexington, working on the comprehensive plan. So I'm going to speak very briefly about housing types, but housing types are really a means to supporting a complete community. And what do I mean by that? If you think about a traditional human settlement is comprised of a wide range of professions, a wide range of ages. I mean, there's the plumber, the lawyer, the homemaker, the butcher, the teacher, the doctor, the farmer, and the pharmacist. They're all living in the same community. It's a complete community, all generations. And in order to have that kind of a community, you have to have the kind of housing that support those different people, whether it be because of their income, their stage in the life cycle, or their preference. Not everyone wants to heat and maintain a large single family home. There are different preferences. So when we talk about housing types, it's really the means to support a more complete community. Next slide, please. So who lives in Lexington now? 60% of the people who live here today moved here since 2000. The median age is above 45, 11,000 plus households, 2.8 persons per household. More than half have postgraduate degrees. We also have some Nobel Prize winners. 34% speak other than English at home. That includes me. 29% are foreign born, 30% Asian, 1% Black, 2% Latinx, and the median income is almost 190,000. Next slide, please. So what percent of Lexington's population do you think will be 60 years or older by the year 2030? Could you launch the poll, please? By 2030, how many people will be 60 years or older? Can we see the results of the poll? So 30%, almost half of you said, and that is the correct answer. Next slide, please. What percent of housing in Lexington is detached single family housing? Could we launch that poll, please? Oh, so this is misaligned. This poll question is asking what percentage of land in Lexington is zoned for multifamily housing? So answer the poll question on question 11. 21%. And the don't have now the answer here. We will have to get that to you later on. 83% are detached single family homes. So what is the missing middle that Liz referred to earlier? If you think about the single detached family home on the left and go all the way to a mid-rise, let's say a condo building all the way to the right, there are a whole range of different building types in between that could be placed throughout a town to make it more of a complete community. And if you widen the range of housing, then you widen the opportunities for a wider range of people. And as I said, different stages of the life cycle, different incomes and different preferences. Next slide, please. So briefly, have you or anyone in your family ever lived in a multifamily dwelling? And what is a multifamily dwelling? What counts as one? A condominium, an apartment, assisted living, a college dorm, a townhouse? Have you any time in your life or a member of your family lived in any of these?
It's an awful question.
So 100% of you have. If you wouldn't mind writing in the chat, what were the circumstances? What kind of multifamily dwelling did you, okay, college, graduate school, early working life, college student, moved to college, early married life, early working life. Oh, the process of moving to Lexington. A lot of people move here first and then search out a single family home. So it's a kind of a transition place for them. So a lot of people, single musician, first jobs, two families growing up. Someone's never lived in a standalone. First apartment, first condo. So you see, there are lots of purposes for having multifamily in order to support a complete community. Next slide, please. Some regional housing trends indicate that older adults and younger adults have some similar preferences in what they would like to see in housing types. So older adults, they're seeking to downsize often now, not always, in walkable compact centers where they can afford to live on a fixed income, no longer have to drive, don't have a house and yard to maintain, have less square footage to furnish and clean, and more opportunities for socializing and running into people. Younger adults are concerned about the affordability of housing, fitness as a part of everyday life, that is walking, biking, not just having to go to the gym for fitness, having opportunities for socializing, protecting the environment, so smaller spaces to heat, maybe using renewable energy sources, using alternative modes of transportation, including public transit, and utilizing less energy. So there is some overlap in the kind of housing type on the two ends of the spectrum for life cycle. Next slide, please. So what are some examples of missing middle housing? It's a range of house scales of buildings with multiple units. They're compatible in scale and form with detached single family homes. So we're not talking about a high-rise apartment building next to between two single family homes. And they're located most usually in walkable neighborhoods. Next slide, please. And what are some benefits of providing this broader range of middle housing? So as we said, the different ages, sizes, incomes, but also people who live in smaller households tend to, not necessarily, but tend to eat out more, creating a market for more local restaurants. Diverse households keep diverse hours, so more people are walking the streets at more varied hours, increasing safety and the feeling of being a kind of more lively community. People who live in walkable neighborhoods tend to own fewer cars, increasing support for public transportation options and decreasing congestion. Next slide, please. Providing older adults opportunities to downsize and age in the community in which they have grown to love. Expanding property rights by allowing property owners more choice in how to use their property. Reducing inequities that keep less affluent people out of amenity-rich communities, so giving more people an opportunity to participate in and enjoy the amenities that a community has. And smaller housing units tend to be more environmentally friendly. Here's some, in addition to the upper story, the upper housing above retail, here's some duplexes. Next slide. Townhouses. Next slide. Courtyard housing that shares communal space. In-law units or accessory dwelling units, as they're known in the planning world. And tiny homes. Next slide, please. So who would you say in the chat, if you would, has difficulty finding housing in Lexington? Any thoughts about who, what sorts of people, what would characterize them? People with mobility challenges and other disabilities, Black families, young people, 20-somethings, first-time homebuyers, young adults, seniors, minorities, young people, school faculty, lower income, non-drivers, police, firefighters, teachers. So a lot of people, a lot of different kinds of people. Real people, young professionals, house cleaners. Next slide, please. And what types of housing would you say are missing in Lexington? We just saw a few of some examples. Townhouses. Everything except large houses. Smaller rental, housing for immigrants, modest single family, one level living, small capes, courtyard style, duplex. So it seems there are a lot of different types of housing missing. Next slide, please. So that's the perfect segue to introduce Judy Barrett, colleague, specializing, she's considered one of the best and most knowledgeable experts in housing in the state and beyond. And she will talk about how we can possibly achieve, what kinds of strategies we can help achieve the goal if we do indeed have that goal. And I just want to point out before Judy gives her presentation that in the goals and objectives that we developed with a lot of input over the last 4 years for this comprehensive plan, there are 2 goals. Goal number 3, to increase diversity of people living and working in Lexington. And goal number 4, to provide a wide range of housing options, which somehow we have to align. At the moment, they almost seem contradictory. So
Daphne, can I just, I know we have a lot to cover, but there are some questions that I think maybe we want to quickly answer a little bit before then. Does anyone, someone asked about recently passed state laws that changed the rules regarding zoning and housing development.
So
And I
Judy
don't
will
know-
talk about that.
Okay, so many of these may be addressed.
Do you want that answered now, Sarah, or do you want to?
No, I just want to make sure we cover the answers. Just maybe we should go through the whole presentation and then we'll answer questions, but.
Yeah, there were, and just to bookmark, there was a couple of questions about how do we encourage more duplexes and kind of, more smaller multifamily housing, or the things other towns are doing. How do we change frontage and easements in order to encourage and enable more affordable housing? So there's a couple of questions about that, Judy. So
yeah, thank you.
So shall I proceed, or do you want to?
you proceed. We're just kind of flagging those because you may hit those in your presentation, but we don't want to lose track of those because people are putting questions in the chat, and we know they want to see their presentations, but we also want to make sure we get to those questions. But just flagging those for you in case you'll touch on them.
Thank you, Judy.
So can you all see this?
Yes.
Okay, super. So my focus is really on fair housing and how that relates to the affordable housing laws and policies that we have in Massachusetts today. And because I'm old, I get to take you on a little history lesson, because I think sometimes it's helpful to kind of think back to kind of how we got to where we are. So I did grow up in the 1960s, and I'm often asked by my younger colleagues, what was it like to be a hippie? And what I actually like to remind people of is that the 60s was an incredibly tumultuous period. And so, yes, a lot of us did have fun, and we went to cool concerts and did rallies and so forth. But those middle images in this slide are from Boston. They're not from Detroit. They're not from LA. They're not from New York or Chicago. They're from Boston. One is from a march that turned into a riot in 1967, which is when Boston really sort of joined the race riot decade. And the other one is from the early 1970s, when at the height of the beginning of the busing crisis. So, there's a long kind of history here around tension around race and how neighborhoods are formed and who gets to live in them or not. And of course, the other thing that came out of the 1960s, which is with us today as well, was the emergence of the environmental movement. So it was a very, very tumultuous, demanding, complicated period for anybody who lived through it, and much of what took place in that decade we are continuing to live with, including a lot of our understanding about fair housing. So the Fair Housing Act, the federal act, was adopted in, was passed in April of 1968. It was exactly a week after Martin Luther King was killed. And that was about 50 years after a path-breaking Supreme Court decision in a case called Buchanan v. Worley. And I won't bore you with all the details about that, but I think it's helpful to kind of know a little bit about that case, because despite the fact that the 14th Amendment kind of guaranteed all people access to due process of law and equal protection, that's not exactly what happened. And so in Louisville, Kentucky, in the 1900s, there was an ordinance that prohibited Blacks from living in a neighborhood that was majority white. And so Mr. Buchanan was trying to sell a home to a buyer by the name of Worley, who was Black. Buchanan was not. And Worley couldn't execute the sale because he was Black and he wanted to buy in a neighborhood that was majority. And so Buchanan sued to try to force him to Mr. Worley to honor the sale. And a lower court in Kentucky said, well, actually that ordinance is legal, it's fine. I mean, the fact that we have equal protection doesn't mean that everybody gets to live together. The case was appealed to the federal Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, actually, you can't do that. That is a government action that constitutes a denial of equal protection of the laws. So the ordinance is invalid. The reason that case is important is that it helps to understand why we went through an extended period of things like deed restrictions and so forth that led to private discrimination, which kind of brings us forward to how we got to the Fair Housing Act of 1968. But there's a long kind of history here. And so when the Fair Housing Act was passed, Congress essentially said there shall not be housing discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, religion, sex, or familial status, and disability was added later. But those are the groups that are essentially protected by the Federal Fair Housing Act, which says housing discrimination is simply illegal, can't be done. Many of you may be familiar with these maps. These are from a period of about approximately 3 years when the Homeowners Loan Corporation existed. And there's a lot of kind of misunderstanding about the history of this. So I just want to make sure people understand these maps were created to advise on the risk of making loans to homebuyers in communities in metro areas. And so because this was 1933, it was not today. People didn't have the internet. They didn't have the technology to sort of do the kind of risk assessment that can be done simply on the internet today. So the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which was actually a New Deal initiative, was relying largely on input from local realtor boards about where the areas are that are safe to invest in versus those which might put a loan at risk. Now, we sort of know today that the impact of some of these decisions lives on. But the actual intent of it was to say, we've come out of we're in a terrible depression, and many people have lost their homes. And how do we help them? And how do we change the mortgage industry so that A, more people can buy homes, but B, we avoid a situation where lenders are putting their money into neighborhoods that are in decline. And therefore, if a loan goes belly up, it may not be possible to rescue the loan. So out of that sort of interest in trying to come up with a new system of assigning credit risk, we ended up with a framework for identifying areas where maybe lenders shouldn't be lending money. How those decisions were made is beyond the presentation I'm doing this evening. But just to point out that when we look at these maps today, what we actually care about is not sort of how people made those decisions in 1933 because we weren't there. It's really more the impact, the long-term impact of how some of these decisions were made about where are good parts of communities and where are bad parts. So this was sort of a government action, if you will, that occurred in 1933. Homeowners Loan Corporation was continuing to process loans until 1951, but only was loaning money for a 3-year period during the 1930s. But it was an attempt by the federal government to say, we're going to fix the mortgage industry in this country because it's a mess, but we're also going to try to create a new system for understanding what is risk. And well, out of that has come a pattern in our metropolitan area where it is easier for some people to move into an area than others. And just to be clear, if you're not familiar with the map, the sort of red areas, the pink that you see, were hazardous areas where a lender shouldn't be loaning money. And you can tell that this is much of Boston, it's Somerville, it's Cambridge, it's Chelsea. That's what was identified as highest risk. The yellow, which included a few spaces in Lexington, were definitely declining areas. So these were places that were considered to be kind of at risk of doing a loan. The blue and the green were the sort of more desirable, kind of safe places to lend money. Well, out of this kind of process of trying to assess risk, what we ended up doing was creating these enclaves where it's just a lot easier for wealth to establish and solidify. So you might think about kind of where those blotches are in your own map and wonder, well, how does that really, inform who we are today as a community?
Judy, I just want to interrupt. A couple of people have asked, just confirming that map that you showed was actually from the 1930s.
Yeah, that is the Homeowners Loan Corporation map. The data, just to be clear, folks, I had a choice to either put this map up or the original Hulk maps. I like the data. We made the map ourselves with the Hulk data, but if you looked at the map from 1930, you'd see the same coloration for Lexington and the same areas so identified. So yes, it is the data from the 1930s. So what I'd like you to kind of think about is sort of how all these things kind of come together and how do we connect these dots between the Federal Fair Housing Act, which is April of 1968, and Chapter 40B, which is November of 1969. That was not a coincidence. That, in fact, is all kind of what was going on at the end of the 1960s that really was sort of causing legislators in Massachusetts to think about where are there barriers to living in Massachusetts? Why do we have urban centers that are such high concentrations of people who are very low income, but out in the suburbs where communities get to sort of exclude through their land use regulations? Somehow that kind of doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense from an economic development perspective or a fairness perspective. So Chapter 40B, which we all talk about as the Affordable Housing Law in Massachusetts, is actually the regional planning statute. The same law that created the Metropolitan Area Planning Council and all of our other RPAs in Massachusetts is the parent legislation for the Affordable Housing Law. That is just like 4 little sections that were added to the Regional Planning Act. Well, why is it there? It's because the framework of the law is actually not about local housing need. It's about regional housing need. And how do we reduce barriers within labor market areas, within metropolitan areas for people to choose, have reasonable choices about where they might live. So thinking about Chapter 40B as the Commonwealth's Fair Housing Law is a helpful thing to do, because that really is what was underneath it, was how do we open opportunities for people to choose where they could live. This article from the Washington Post, which is from a couple of years ago, really kind of takes a look at the impact of so-called snob zoning. It's not my favorite term, but it is sort of the term of art in the field, that kind of recognizes that the patterns of segregation that we have today, wherever their genesis may be, whether it was the Homeowners Loan Corporation or something else, the fact is that we are now using ordinances and bylaws in Massachusetts to institute and preserve residential development patterns that effectively enable some people to choose to live in a community over others who don't even have a choice. We have in sort of exclusionary zoning in our suburban communities, really a system of people finding housing based on chance, not choice. So understanding 40B and what it isn't, I do a lot of work with 40B, and I know a lot of communities don't like it. And frankly, as a planner, I would much prefer that a community never had to use Chapter 40B to create affordable housing. I would love to say that a community was able to do this through its own zoning, through its own lending, being sort of a lender and providing financial support, and never needed Chapter 40B to be conscious of fair housing. But that in fact is not the case. And so understanding 40B from the standpoint of state policy, I think is helpful. The idea is that there will be a regional fair share distribution. Every community in Massachusetts should have a fair share standard of affordable housing. Lexington, of course, being over 10%, has met that fair share standard. That doesn't mean your local need is met. It just means that you've met a regional threshold for whether developers have access to an easy appeal process or not. The intent, of course, is to reduce concentrations of low-income residents in city neighborhoods, in part out of fair housing concerns, but also out of just economic development concerns, that we don't end up with sort of city neighborhoods and city commercial centers that can't thrive because there's not enough of an income mix. And that clearly was the case in the 1960s for anybody who knows anything about Boston history, it was not a pretty time. And therefore making cities more attractive for investment and employment. If you sort of have everybody kind of sharing responsibility, providing affordable housing, that means more market rate housing also can be built in our urban centers. The effect of 40B is a limited override, and I stress limited override of the local zoning power. Some of you may be familiar with the concept of home rule. Massachusetts prides itself on being a home rule state, but there are limitations. And one of them is that when zoning goes too far to prevent people from having a choice to live in your community, the relief valve for the developer is to pursue through Chapter 40B a permitting process that favors the construction of affordable housing. But I want to just stress, it really has nothing to do with local housing need. The focus is on regional need for affordable housing. So every community ought to have a housing plan and understand what its needs are, because Chapter 40B is not designed to answer that question. Because of the Fair Housing Act, because Massachusetts has counterpart laws, including but not limited to Chapter 40B, there are things that we all need to be conscious of when we're talking about housing in communities, especially in public hearings where permitting authorities may be considering applications, whether it's through Chapter 40B or under your own zoning. There are just things you need to be conscious of, bearing in mind that there are laws in place to prevent against discrimination based on race, on color, on religion, on age, on familial status. I can't tell you how many communities I work in where I hear people say, senior housing is fine, we need senior housing, but building affordable housing for families is just going to bring in more school-age children. If my children can attend school in my town, so can the children of a Black family. And the law is intended to make sure that I don't get and that you don't get to keep people out of your schools because of reasons that really are unjust in terms of fair housing. I often hear concerns about group homes. They really shouldn't be in residential neighborhoods because there's no services. Well, we don't get to pick our neighbors. And there's a lot of valid reason to think about placing group homes more in family environments, but it is scary to people. So we need to make sure that when people are considering housing for people with disabilities, that there's an understanding that they have just as much a right to live in your neighborhood as you do. I've heard people say, well, we shouldn't be putting low-income housing in our towns because kids from low-income families will never be here, will never fit in here. That's not a judgment call that's appropriate for a community to make. That's the choice of a family with children that's trying to make a choice about where to live. This issue about senior housing comes up over and over again. I've also heard in communities like yours, frankly, that, well, we need senior housing, but an affordable housing development doesn't really work because our seniors are too high income and they need something else. And that's fine. Then, create product that appeals to a market rate older adult. But it doesn't change the fact that there are also seniors living in your community who are really struggling to stay there. And probably many have left because it's just a very expensive town to live in. Communities that have the METCO program, I hear this all the time. Well, we already have METCO. I mean, do we really need to do anything else? METCO is not a subject for a substitute for fair housing. So what does it take to actually make an affordable housing agenda successful? I think it takes these four things, and I want to talk a little bit about them in kind of Lexington's context. It takes leadership, it takes advocacy, it takes regulatory reform, and it takes investment. And all of those are tools that municipalities can bring to the table, just as they already use them for other purposes that have nothing to do with housing. I think there is no substitute for it to stop talking and to just start doing. And you may make a mistake. You may pass zoning that doesn't work. You may try something that isn't as successful as you think. Well, that's been the whole history of zoning in Massachusetts and beyond. You try something, it doesn't work, you try something else. You have enough information, as you're probably one of the most highly educated communities in Massachusetts. You have knowledge that many communities I work in wish they had. You have this forum, you have the comprehensive plan housing chapter that will come. You already did a meeting on housing 2 years ago. Don't lose sight of that content because that's important educational material. I guess my point is you as a community have a lot to work with, and it may not be obvious to you, but it's time to do something. And hopefully this forum will inspire people to move forward. I was thrilled to see Liz's slide with the ideas that Carol has already worked on instituting in terms of a development strategy. That is music to my ears. Those are all things that can help communities be more successful with affordable housing development. This topic, as far as I'm concerned, and I think many of us in the planning world would say, this is really about housing justice. So you go again, like thinking about yourselves as a local government, what are the tools that you bring to the table? It's ask yourself some questions. First of all, probably the leaders in a community in conversation about land use and growth and change and development. Where's your town manager on this subject? Where's your select board? Where's your planning board? When they meet, do they have regularly scheduled discussions about housing? The reason I bring this up is that one of the most important things you can do is to make housing not only an important topic, but frankly, a very sexy one that makes people want to serve on a housing partnership, on a housing board, on a housing trust, just as much as they want to serve on a board like the select board. How do you make it that important? Will you make it a conversation at that level? What do you want your new comprehensive plan to say about where you want to encourage mixed uses and higher density housing? You have choices, and because of some legislation that was alluded to earlier, it may be easier to institute some regulatory reform in fairness of multifamily housing that would be easier to pass. There's some relief now. It's not a perfect piece of legislation, but it's something. Do your boards communicate about things? I mean, you have an economic advisory committee, you have a housing partnership. Do they all talk about housing and how housing is an economic development issue? Because as a planner, I can certainly tell you it is. Does your community preservation committee have a good working relationship with all these boards and public officials whose interests involve things that CPA can assist? Is serving on your housing partnership as prestigious as serving on your planning board, your school committee, your community preservation commission? If it isn't, make it. You have the power to do that. Do you have more applicants for a seat on the housing partnership than, say, the appropriations committee? Think about what are the things that people really want to serve on because they have an interest in the town or political aspirations or just an interest. How can housing be one of those things that's up there that people, when they're filling out their forms saying they want to serve in local government, that's their number one choice? How do you support housing equity? This image on the right side of the slide is from an initiative in Acton, where they basically put out these fact sheets about different types of jobs that exist in the community. What are those wage levels? And what would it cost for someone who's waiting on a table in your town to live in your community? What can they actually afford in rent versus what are the actual rents that exist in your town? In this case, it's an image of a waiter who's saying, there's always a seat at my table. Can I be your neighbor? What is your official messaging about housing affordability, about multifamily housing, about investing in housing for people who work in your town? Do you have people who will speak at public hearings and town meetings and so forth about the need for and benefits of affordable housing? Liz alluded earlier to the importance of advocates. I completely agree. I can't stress it enough. You need them because, believe me, you already know this, but the opponents are very organized. You need to be able to offset that in the face of your hearing authority, your permitting authorities. So they really do hear that there's multiple voices on this topic. And are your advocates organized? There are a lot of things that communities can do to support the organization of advocacy. It's just a question of how important do you make this topic and how desirable do you make this topic in your town? How can you use regulatory powers to increase housing choice? This is one of my favorite topics. So that image on the top of this slide harkens to Daphne's comments about missing middle. That is actually the Hydrostone neighborhood in Halifax, Nova Scotia, where my son lives. And it is absolutely a classic missing middle town where you have a mix of single family, two family townhouse units on opposite sides of a street with a boulevard, an open space strip running between the two sides of the street. It's just a wonderful neighborhood, and there's a lot of life to it. So thinking about things like, how do you make neighborhoods like that? Well, you don't make them when you have larger lots and all single family development. It's just a different development pattern. Do you have inclusionary zoning? What would it take to make it work? Because it doesn't work everywhere, and it doesn't work for all types of development. But so if you're going to do it, make sure you do it in a way that's going to make it work. Do you already encourage a mix of unit types by right anywhere? Because if you don't, that's something you could do. Do you allow multifamily units at a realistic density in or near your town center or neighborhood commercial centers? And have you ever considered expediting the permitting process for deeply affordable housing developments? Cambridge has done it. Can Lexington? That map is from Cambridge. It's the identification of their so-called 100% affordable overlay district. Every town I work with is saying, well, how did Cambridge do it? Well, they created an overlay that encourages subsidized housing that is low income. And so they're expediting the permitting for those kinds of projects. And it's working. Not everybody can use it. Not everybody uses it, but where there's a project that makes sense under that zoning and brings a subsidy with it to make the housing affordable, it has access to an expedited permitting process. That's the kind of policy that makes affordable housing get built. Studying the wage levels and housing prices in your town. The housing price slides that were shown earlier are very important. Don't lose sight of wage levels because there are people working in your community right now who I guarantee you don't live there. And if you're concerned about sustainability and traffic and so forth, think about how do you make it possible for people who work in your town to actually live there. Understand not only what they're getting paid, but where are they commuting from? Have you ever gone out and talked to local workers and business owners, not just the people who own the property, but actually employ people and the workers themselves? Do you have opportunities to use things like Chapter 40R, which is an alternative to Chapter 40B? It's a kind of a zoning overlay district you can create to encourage multifamily and other types of housing. And that, by the way, clearly is eligible for a reduced threshold to vote at town meeting, or even using Chapter 40B proactively. I know your town has done that. You can continue to do that even though you're over 10%. There's nothing that says once you're over 10%, you close the book. That's just not the case. Have you done a racial impact study to evaluate whether your current rules disproportionately affect Black people and people of color? I was struck, frankly. I was going to show some maps and I decided not to, of just what the racial breakdown is by your census block groups, so I could kind of look at Lexington from internally. I was going to show some maps about sort of where the minority percentages and specifically Black families, and the percentages are so low that the maps really, I think, weren't very helpful, and I decided not to use them. Have you considered something as modest as allowing 2-family homes in all residential districts? That has actually just recently passed in California, that 2-family homes will be allowed everywhere. And so why can't we do that in Massachusetts? Accessory dwelling units are great. They can help. They're not really a solution for all types of housing needs, but they are certainly a start. And they do help some families and older adults to either stay in the home they already own or find choice in their community. What do you want your comprehensive plan to say about targeting development? Because the plan and the capital improvements decisions you make all sort of need to relate together to create the kind of physical evolution you seek, which is really what the vision of your comprehensive plan should be. Can you align your capital spending priorities with your planning goals? Do you have the political will to do that? Are you willing to make a significant investment in creating and protecting affordable housing at multiple income levels, not only moderate income? I stress that you have people working in your community in very low wage jobs. So there are certainly folks who have needs at the sort of 80% income limit that I think was discussed a little bit earlier. But don't lose sight of the fact that there are people who are serving you coffee every morning at the coffee shop who are not at 80% of median income. They're at 30 or they're at 50. So how do you make sure that you provide housing at multiple income levels? It takes investment. Anybody who thinks that inclusionary zoning can just solve all these problems is frankly not being honest with you. So think about how you can use not only CPA funds, but frankly, your own general fund revenue to say, we're going to really do a serious housing bank. Do you make non-CPA resources available The town of Nantucket gave $25 million to their housing trust to be able to create housing in Nantucket, just to help people who are working there, who really, it's just not viable to be taking the ferry from Hyannis every day. Has Lexington prepared a municipal property study and identified potential locations for affordable housing? These are all questions to kind of ask yourself about how much have we actually done, sort of where are we in the sort of municipal report card on affordable housing? Do you have a comprehensive housing strategy? Again, I was really thrilled to see the slide that Liz put up earlier with the development strategy Carol has outlined, because those are all really important pieces to getting anywhere. Do you provide training every year for your planning board, your board of appeals, other boards and municipal staff, so they understand housing laws and the function of housing in building a community and why housing is so important? Because frankly, folks, if it wasn't that important, people wouldn't be fighting to keep stuff out of their neighborhood. So how do you actually train your boards to understand fair housing from a fair housing perspective and an equity perspective? It's one thing to have a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. It's another thing to actually make it possible for people to live in the town who can then serve on that committee. So I just would like to sort of, leave you with this thought. You do have choices as a community. Lexington is fortunate. I think you have a lot of choices. And there are things that you certainly can do, but nothing will work unless you do.
Thank you, Judy. That was pretty incredible. And I think we got some incredible discussion going in the chat.
Okay. I couldn't see all that while I was running the slides, so I thought, I hope somebody's paying attention to this.
It moves very fast. I just want to.
So if Amanda can put up the previous PowerPoint, we have more.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
So we are just time checker. It's at 8:46. And I don't know, we're supposed to end at 9. I don't know if we're going to go longer, but we're at the Q&A. Great.
So we thought we'd start, if you go to the next slide. Maybe we should start with if there are any questions of Judy or Liz. And then we can go to these, any specific questions.
And are people supposed to type those in the chat, Daphne? Because I don't
Yes,
think people
they are. Yes, they are. So someone said, how can we stop the teardowns?
Judy or Liz.
Well, if you think about where teardowns are occurring, they're occurring in towns where there's no easy land left to build on. And although I know it makes people cringe to think about this, you can literally, when you change your zoning, you create land. And so you need to think about, I think as any community does with teardowns, what alternatives, what meaningful alternatives do you provide to create housing in your town? And if the only option is tearing something down in order to build, a large home, if that's all you're offering, then that's what you're going to get.
Someone is asking about the housing choice zoning legislation.
Sure. So there's a lot of unknowns about how the housing choice bill is going to be implemented. So I want to be careful. The intent of the housing choice bill is to make it easier for communities to change their zoning to create housing, to meet the region's need for housing, out over the next 25 or 30 years. Some aspects of that bill are very clear. A community that seeks to do a Chapter 40R district, for example, an overlay district to create affordable housing, it's pretty clear that could go to town meeting and be passable on a simple majority vote. As you may know, normally zoning takes a 2/3 vote. So by reducing the threshold, what the legislature sought to do with the governor was to make it easier to permit or to create districts, to create zoning options that would allow for the creation of more housing. There are some aspects of the bill that are still a little bit muddy. I think DHCD, the Department of Housing and Community Development, is working very hard to try to provide more guidance to communities. We just don't have it all yet. But I would say certainly a Chapter 40R district, it's pretty clear. If you have areas that are near transit, being able to create housing, multifamily districts as of right for at least 15 units an acre. I think that that's also pretty clear that that could be done on a simple majority basis. If anybody finds simple majority scary and frightening, like, oh my God, why would we do that? I just want to point out to you that Massachusetts is the only state in the entire country that has a 2/3 vote requirement for all zoning changes. So really, this is a baby step toward joining the 20th century on land use policy.
So for the remaining 10 minutes, why don't we just promote everyone to panelists so that they could have a conversation?
Sure.
In the meantime, how can a town create forever affordable housing affordability that doesn't expire in 15 years and become market rate?
You can invest in it. Make
So
money.
I would say that, oh, sorry.
That's all right. Liz, do you want to go? I've been talking too much.
Yeah, I would say that all affordable housing that has been built over the last 15 years is in fact in perpetuity. And there's not a 15-year expiration for affordable housing. Right. So that's what the deed restrictions, I think there were some questions about that. That's what the deed restriction provides for you.
Right.
There was one question earlier that I'd like to throw out to folks too, which is, does the need for affordable housing clash with the desire of those for historic preservation or conservation? Can the plan achieve these multiple goals? Or are they in conflict inherently?
Well, they don't have to be in conflict, but they often are. This is where I think, instead of having things pitted against each other, making sure that the advocacy on all these topics are actually communicating and collaborating makes a big difference. We have lots of examples in Eastern Massachusetts of older homes that were just quietly divided up into 5 or 6 condominiums, and now all of a sudden you have multiple units, all kind of effectively writing down the cost of land. And the house was preserved. I mean, from the exterior, the house has been preserved. Those kinds of opportunities exist. But again, I just underscore, if the only thing you're offering is the ability to tear down to build something bigger, if that's essentially what your zoning is asking for, guess what? That's what you're going to get.
And Judy, just to add to what you said, on Liz's website, the RHSO, there's a whole set of examples from the region.
Yeah.
Of how that was accomplished.
Yes.
Liz, I don't know if you want to say something about that.
And Bob Creech has his hand raised, I believe, or did. Did you, Bob?
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, Judy, I don't agree with you. House prices are driven by demand and not by supply. Not by supply. We do have 2-family houses being built in Lexington. They sell for between $1.4 and $1.7 million, and that's not helping anybody. And by the way, the builders have no responsibility for affordable housing, so we cannot rely upon the builders. As one builder said to us in one of our meetings for a special permit, we asked him to include some affordable units. He said, no, he said, I can't. He said, we build affordable units all the time, but only if the zoning requires it. Otherwise, we don't do it. So in other words, the zoning is not about frontage and that kind of a thing, or lot size. It's about requiring the affordable housing as part of the permit.
So I hear you. You might want to visit the Mass Housing Partnership website, because MHP, which is the Mass Housing Partnership, participated with a national organization to study this very issue. And I think you might find out that actually, for the most part, inclusionary zoning does not work. It's not just having the inclusionary zoning. The economics of the zoning have to work as well.
And again, the economics in Lexington, and I'm only talking about Lexington.
Right, understand that.
And I grew up in Quincy, by the way, so I know, and I grew up in a 2-family house. You are not going to get affordable housing in Lexington unless it's required. You're not going to get it by letting people build on a 2,000 square foot lot in Lexington.
That's exactly what Judy is saying, Bob.
Sorry.
Cindy has her hand up.
Yes, hi, thank you very much. I'd like to go back to the beginning of this presentation and, we talked, or this whole night, and talking about the things that have changed since 2003, and there was many, in Lexington. But I would also like to add, and many people may not be surprised, that we have acknowledged that we have a climate emergency. We've got to do something about it. So what I'd like to say is that, in addition to this great conversation about injustices being corrected, or trying to correct, different levels of housing and diversity and equity and inclusion. I would like to ask that the comprehensive plan also please consider public health. And I'll give you an example. The Harvard School of Public Health has talked about fossil fuel combustion in smaller houses being a great cause of many issues in residents there. And at some point tonight, it was talked about, younger people want smaller units, it's more environmentally friendly. But if you're still burning fossil fuels in those houses, it's not environmentally friendly. I'd also ask you to think about when we get to the point, like I hope we get past this, and I hope that we do create more housing. But when we get to the point of building the housing, we need to make sure that housing that we build is resilient, is healthy for the people that are living there. That we've got to do a good job on insulation, lower their bills and move away from fossil fuels. And to anybody who might say, well, that's going to cost too much, it's been proven time and time again that the costs really aren't more, and the value that you create, the health benefits, it far outweigh all of that, and also the long-term sort of operational costs. This is really important. Please consider this when you move forward. Thank you.
So Avram has his hand raised. Avram, would you like to say something? Richard also has his hand raised.
I can speak. So I think when I left the planning board, there was sort of a three-tiered approach to housing. One is sort of the offshoot for what the SPRD committee and this, whatever is going to be proposed tomorrow night for scattered housing throughout town, which probably would be the least viable in terms of helping the housing issues. But the idea is that all the consultants that we've had said that we should have high density housing at Hartwell, and talked about we need 450 units of housing, which would include quite a bit of affordable capital A as well as small a affordable. And the other part is the sort of the medium density housing along the bus routes, where it is more walkable. That's really the key to getting large numbers of housing units. I think trying to, and it's smart zoning, it's putting density where people don't need to have cars. By spreading people out throughout the community, it's dumb zoning, because you need cars, it's going to create more congestion, and that's not where our priority should be. They should be creating lots of housing and high density where it belongs, medium density along the bus lines, and scattered housing where it's, where you need a car to get around.
Good points, Richard. I'm under the impression that the town is looking to do a 40R at Hartwell Avenue. Someone correct me if I'm mistaken.
Well, part of the problem is that Lexington's a pretty wealthy community, and what we would get in terms of we might get $500,000 over a long run for something like that. And I think we can afford to have private developers do the housing. We can control it, and we don't have to go through some of the bureaucratic things that 40R or 40S might entail. That's my comment.
Thank you. Avram, is your hand up by accident?
No, it is not. I didn't answer before because my name is Avram, not.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm very sorry.
That's okay. You're not the first person who's mispronounced.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. Thank you. I feel better.
As a matter of fact, everybody mispronounces my name. So first, I didn't know what Richard Canale was going to say, but I agree completely with him, especially about Hartwell Avenue. But that's not really my question. Or this is more of a comment, which is we talk about the need for affordable housing in part so that because, police officers and teachers and firefighters can't afford to live here. But I really think that's a little bit of a red herring, because why should a teacher or a firefighter, or a police officer who in many cases have advanced degrees who work in this town have to live in affordable housing? The problem is really the housing prices, and I'll give you, I think they're just out of control. And a teacher with a master's degree, or in some cases a PhD, should not have to live in affordable housing. And I can give you one example that my daughter is a senior now at LHS. The year after she left Bowman, when she was in 6th grade, I noticed that her 5th grade teacher had left the school, and I was there for some errand or something. And one of the other teachers told me because he got a job at another town where he could make more money, but also where there was nicer houses at much lower costs. So I think that's going to continue to happen, that we're going to lose valuable people because of our ridiculous home prices.
Very good point. And I think that everyone touched upon the point that affordable has different meanings. There's the small a, the capital A, affordable to what percentage of the average median income. So when we say affordable, it doesn't necessarily mean subsidized. It could be attainable. We talk about a whole range of affordability, but when the housing prices are so high, there's no range, right? It's just a high price point.
Right, and just to add to that too, I don't think the statistic was given tonight, but 30% of Lexington households are housing cost burden. So there are a lot of people who really can't afford to live in Lexington who do live there.
Meaning they pay more than 30% of their income.
Yes, their gross income. Yeah.
You see that Patricia has her hand up?
Yes, I was just about to.
Actually, there are a couple of points. One is, I think our town manager, Malloy, some time ago said that there are very few of the town employees who would qualify for the affordable housing because their incomes are too high. That's one. The other thing is, and to Evans' point, it is because the price of housing here, which is we have no control over, is one of the reasons why they don't live here in town. But the other thing is we keep on talking about affordable housing should be located near public transportation, which we have very poor public transportation here in Lexington. If we had somebody who was going to need to work in some other town on a holiday or on Sunday, there is absolutely no public transportation whatsoever in Lexington on Sunday. And it stops running at an indecent hour in the evening during the week. I'm not even sure what it does on Saturday. And from time to time, the MBTA tells us that they're going to discontinue our routes because we don't have enough people using them. And the reason we don't have enough people using them is because they don't run at a time when we need them. So what do we do about public transportation in order to have affordable housing? And then when you talk about density, if you are not going to have public transportation and you're going to have 4 units in one building, that's probably going to be at least 4, if not 8 cars.
And that relates to another question in the chat. A couple of people pointed out whether, when talking about developing affordable housing, whether transportation impacts and traffic impacts are taken into account. And they need to be, but as Patricia points out, it has to be a simultaneous. It's public transportation, economic development, and housing have to be tied together. They have to be developed in a comprehensive manner.
But what can we do about the MBTA?
Well, that one's a little bit of a challenge. But some communities are doing more regional shuttle routes. And I know that Lexington did attempt to do a regional.
We have Express during the week.
Yes.
But that's during the week and until 6 o'clock.
I know, and not on weekends. And it's actually a
That's
problem
right.
for working in the restaurants. So another issue to tackle. Russ.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much for picking me. I live in the Monroe Hill area, and over the last few years, I have watched 2 very developable sites, developable in my view for cluster developments of some kind. 2 sites instead go to single-family homes because the either the new owner developer in one case or prospective developers in other cases were scared off, frankly, by the process through the planning board to get a cluster development put in place. It's a discretionary approval, and you have to, basically the sense is that you have to avoid neighbors' opposition as well as going through the gauntlet of getting town approvals. So my question to the group is, what does it take to change that so that doing a cluster development with affordable housing incorporated into it is closer to a by rights approval process that will attract developers who want to do good quality multi-unit developments, including affordable housing, instead of reverting to the large mansions that we get?
Judy, Liz, any thoughts on that? How can cluster development with an affordable component be closer to by right?
We're actually working on that. This is Carol Kowalski, Assistant Town Manager for Development, a resident and actually member of the Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee several years ago, proposed a warrant article to amend our bylaw. The town meeting referred that article back to, I believe, the select board, who formed an ad hoc committee that's been working on alternatives to that process that Mr. Tanner spoke about. And the committee, with the consultant's help and with significant help from our planning director, Amanda Loomis, has developed some alternatives. And in addition, the chair of the planning board has proposed an alternative development proposal as well. So these aren't silver bullets, but they are attempts to do exactly what Mr. Tanner's commenting on. So we're hopeful. Fingers crossed, we're trying to move forward.
Glad to hear it. Thanks very much.
And it looks
Daphne, I'm seeing a comment that George Burnell has had his hand raised for a while.
I was just going to say that he had his hand raised before, and I neglected to call on him.
Perfect.
I think he's gone.
No, he's there.
In my view, a significant portion of what's being proposed on housing is a solution looking for a problem. This community has spent decades, if not centuries, building a fine community that is the envy of all the surrounding communities. So rather than bringing their problems and dumping them in our laps, how about taking our suggestions or our successes and helping them become as good a community as this one? Now, we have LexHab. We were the first in the state. We developed it. That is affordable housing as well as it has been done anywhere. The present attitude of taking Hartwell Avenue, which is a manufacturing site, and building a warehouse for people there is just absurd. So I challenge you to change your viewpoint and to cast a view that says what great neighborhoods we have, what a fine job we've done with affordable housing, and not try to upset the challenge of economics, which you don't get done by all the gimmicks that are being thrown around, and use our successes and sure, there are some, for example, I'll give you just one example of things we can do. We have a lot of lots that are 30,000 square feet. They don't need to be. I would make them 7,500 or 6,000 square foot, but I would have single family homes on them. Why are they 30,000 square feet? Because they were zoned that way when the town did not have sewers, and they had to have that much land in order to handle the human waste from the building. So that's a small change, but it can be handled. But those are the things we take one at a time and not try to.
So I don't think that anyone is saying not to celebrate the successes, and there have been many. And as you say, Martha, Judy, and I, and Liz, we work in other communities, and many of them are envious of Lexington for many reasons. But does that mean that, what percentage, Martha, is it that cannot afford to live here that already lives here? You're on mute, Martha.
I think it was 30%.
Yeah.
Yes, third, and a good portion of those are severely cost burdened.
So already people who are living here are paying more than they should be, based on, you know, a lot of studies that have determined if you pay more than 30%, you have a harder time with the rest of your life and expenses and bringing up a family. But also, Lexington is a wonderful community. Is it fair that it can only be enjoyed by some? Those who by accident of birth or other reasons can afford to live here, which are becoming increasingly fewer in number and in type of person. Is that fair? Mr. Burnell?
You can't keep it as a fine community and make it cheap. It doesn't work that way. Those are economics that you can't gimmick around. So if you're going to build warehouses for people, and you're going to bring all those people to town, add them to the schools, raise the cost of schools without the revenue to support them, then everything goes downhill. If you want to make it cheap, all you got to do is fire half of the staff at the high school, and the town will become cheaper overnight. That's not what we want. And if that's what you want, you're working in the wrong town.
We're trying to determine what the townspeople want. That's what we're trying to do. And using regulations that are in place and some laws about fair housing that we must abide by.
What you have today is basically what the people in this town want. All the effort going in here is for people who don't live in town, who haven't been part of building it. And they're tearing it down, not building it, not improving.
Ben, would you like to say something?
Sure. Sorry, I don't have a good question for Ruth. I really appreciated her talk, but my comment is more about, maybe it's a little bit about what Grinnell just mentioned, is sort of our biggest strength is our wealth. And I mean, I'm an architect, and a lot of the clients that I work with sort of act as developers on their own. And I think if there was a mechanism or just a way to create more great examples of small housing on their own properties. I mean, I see people taking on development duties on their own homes all the time. If they can be, I don't know if it's accessory dwelling units. I think, you know, we shouldn't necessarily all just talk about developers, 40Bs, it's confusing. A lot of people just want to solve problems, and they have amazing wealth to do it. And I think I brought one project in front of zoning board for an expanded dwelling unit. And I remember one of the comments from someone on zoning board was, "You're going to open Pandora's box." And I wonder if anyone could raise their hand here who even knows what an expanded accessory dwelling unit is. And my question is, how come there's only been one or two, as far as I know, ever implemented in the town of Lexington, which is amazing to me that wealthy, aging people in their homes aren't choosing to divide their home up, continue to live in their house. Is it a design problem? Is it a marketing problem? Or is it the zoning board? Or is it Lexington really kind of needing to face themselves to say, you know what, it's not opening a Pandora's box, it's addressing a problem. And I really appreciate LexNext. I think I'm really gonna pay attention to what you guys are doing.
So Ben, could you expand a little bit on what they were concerned about? What was leaving the box of Pandora? What exactly was leaving that was of concern?
Well, here's a client came to me saying, I'd like to have my house, a big 5,000 plus square foot house, and I'd like to develop it with an affordable unit in it, because I'm moving from the city. Or no, I think the example of the owner was, you know, my sister lives in Dorchester. She would love to live here, and we want to develop a home within our home. And I was really a rental. Yeah, it's a rental. Accessory dwelling units, you can rent them out. It's not just, you know, for relatives. It can be 40% of the total gross floor area, which is you know, and that in their case, it was a 1,500 square foot unit. Ultimately, they didn't build it, but why aren't projects like that happening more in the town? I think we're so affluent that sharing, you know, our personal space with a renter is just, we don't need, most people don't need to do it. That's probably a big reason. But maybe it could be incentivized, streamlined, pushed. Maybe it was, you know, open up the design process more to be more flexible. Maybe accessory dwelling units should be allowed to be separate structures, which right now they're not allowed to be able to be. So.
Thank you. And design is a very critical component of all of what you said.
So Daphne, just on a,
yeah. sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I think that's exactly right. I think, people are very conscious of moving into their neighborhoods and not rubbing people the wrong way. I also understand that it makes sense in some cases to not have it look like two homes, but on other lots, the town is pretty diverse, and it's, lots of different shapes, and different areas should be looked at individually, perhaps by the zoning board, to say, yeah, that's appropriate here, go for it.
So Daphne, I just want to, we are getting late. We did have a raffle. I don't want to lose people without the raffle. There's also a few people with hands up who have already spoken, but a few who haven't. Should we give the people who haven't spoken yet a
I
quick
was just gonna
chance?
say that Tina hasn't spoken yet, so.
So there's Tina, Kui Young, and David. I see several hands, but how much
So
time?
let's assume we hold it at those three, and then we'll do the raffle and hopefully close to 9:30.
Great. And I want to give another plug, LexingtonNext.org. If you haven't had a chance to speak your mind, go to that site, go to the social pinpoint, and there's more chances to share your views. So, but Tina, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I love the idea of the cottage, the village, the courtyard style housing along the bus routes. I think it's a wonderful idea and charming, frankly. I just want to say that I know that the committee that's been working on special permitting, it morphed. I watched. I haven't been to many of the meetings, but I know that it started out with some of the smaller units being 1,300 square feet. And then it shifted to, oh, well, that's too small for people. It needs to be 2,900 square feet as the smallest units. And it's the opposite of what we need to do for families wanting to move to Lexington. Is the opposite of what we want to do if we want to keep our seniors in Lexington. By right zoning would merely make it simpler, faster, and more convenient for developers to build big, expensive houses. If you look at all the two-family houses that have been built over the last 5 or 10 years, they're mega mansions connected to each other. They're just very big houses. Why don't we look at our peer communities and see if they're making things more or less restrictive as a point of comparison? Concord, I believe, requires 20% affordable housing units for dense housing. If someone wants to build dense housing, that's what they end up getting because that's what they require. We need more affordable housing. We need more moderately sized houses, and allowing things to be built by right is not going to get us what we want. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. Chris, who else did you see? Because I'm not seeing.
Kui Young.
And David Cantor, I see. Kui Young, did you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I did. Yeah,
Good.
I live in a small house, and my neighborhood, they knocked down the small house and become a big house now. And then my property taxes goes all the time. So I think I live in now 20 years here. I wonder if we kept the small house, they have property tax goes up. Maybe there be two options. Maybe I sell this house to go well another town, or I knock down house to build a huge house. So I just wonder why you keep talking about further you mean the small house you want to keep. They keep raising the property tax for small house. It means it's hard for the senior, I guess. That's my question.
And are you suggesting that if the property taxes were kept lower on the smaller houses, that might be an incentive to not sell for a tear down?
Yes.
Thank you. And David had his hand up.
David Cantor, I think, was the last question we were going to take.
David, are you there to speak?
Do you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
in light of Mr. Brunel's comments and the absence of any discussion of it and what the activities going on, I would encourage all the work that's done should keep the tax revenue process in mind and realize that with the taxes come a huge amount of services and other purposes that are to Lexington's benefits. And they should be keeping with every one of the proposed actions a reaction to what is the potential effect on the tax rate impact on the town as a whole. Because throughout my time in Lexington, which is approaching 30 years, we do have a cadre of people who feel that they don't like their somebody else speaking. Anyways, that who don't like the increasing tax rate, but they don't want to lose any of the benefits and things they see in town. So that's, of course, a very, in my view, hypocritical position. So I think that the work that's being done should carry with it a monetary impact result so that we can understand whether indeed the town can continue doing the things it does that are in the general interest of everybody, including low policy income, in being in Lexington. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think we ought to, before we get to the raffle, I would really like to thank everyone for your comments, for your thoughtful input in the chat. We do record that, and I know that the website's been put in the chat. We do have a raffle. I hope I win something because there's some good prizes.
You're disqualified.
I know.
Amanda, are you going to do do you have that nifty wheel that you had last?
I do. I am briefly, though, going to have Molly show the prizes. So we have 3 prizes. So she should be able to share her screen right now. There are one of these, and it is a tote bag with a Lexington logo on it. And then also a book written by a local author about the open spaces in Lexington and the historical nature of them. And then the third one is 2 tickets to the 3 houses, the Buckman Tavern, the Hancock Clark House, and the Monroe Tavern. So we'll be having those 3 prizes. So I will now share my screen, if Molly can let me share. Great. All right. Can you see the wheel spinning?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
And the reminder, you have to be here in order to win.
Oh, it's always something.
Some people have left, so that makes it more of a chance for those who are here to win. Hey, William Kennedy.
William Kennedy. All right.
Is he
And
here?
this one's for a bag and a book.
Wait, let's see if he's here, though.
Oh.
Because if he's not, then you have to do it again. William Kennedy, are you here?
He is here. I see him.
Yay.
And then Mona Roy will be the winner of a bag and a book. If they're here.
I don't see Mona.
No, me neither.
She has to be here. We did run late. It seems awfully unfair in some ways, but do we have Mona's contact information?
We do have their contact information.
I don't think we should we should penalize her for not sticking around for.
Chris, you have a point. You have a point because we did run late.
Great. And then the last one is the 2 tickets.
Drum roll, please.
Ooh, that looks like a line. Maureen Ryan.
Hey, Maureen.
Yeah, she's here. She's in the attendees.
Great.
Awesome. And we will contact them via email tomorrow so they can know how to pick up the prize, or we will get the prizes to them.
And just a last commercial announcement on Discovery Day, the CPAC committee will also have a table. So there's a chance for you to check in with us and make your voices heard and learn more information. So do look for us on Discovery Day, or Rediscovery Day, whatever it's being branded this year. And then there's also going to be another event, a public event at the end of October. So be on the lookout for that.
October 26th.
October 26th.
Vibrant commercial districts. And then December 7th will be the final public forum for the comprehensive plan.
And I believe Rediscovery Day is October 9th. Is that correct? That's Saturday of the long weekend.
And all of this will be on the website, Lexington Next website.
Thank you. I want to thank Daphne and Martha for all their work and Liz and Judy. It was wonderful to have you with us. Thank you for sharing your expertise, and mostly to all of you participants for being here and sharing your views. And we will continue to take that in as we put the work on the plan.
And one more plug, Chris, for the social pinpoint. Did you want to make one more plug?
Yeah, I don't know whether we have an opportunity to actually show it, but is that something that you, Amanda, you want to?
Amanda.
I can show that. Give me 2 seconds.
This is a website that allows you to go in and you can actually pick things on a map. You can make comments about things you like to see change.
And Molly's actually going to show it, which is great.
So if you go, this is the LexingtonNext.org website, the Get Involved page. And then you click on mapping. Is that what you're clicking on, Molly?
Yes, you can click here and you can take the first survey, which is a mapping survey. So you can pinpoint spots in town and add comments, and I believe photos as well. Let's see if it loads. Here we go. So here's the map of the town, and you can add your little comments right here. This green button is where you add. And then we also have another survey right here. You can scroll down. And then there's a few more.
Oh, show us the ideas wall.
Yeah.
Yes. Here's the ideas wall.
So here you can pick your favorite place, pick a community value, a neighborhood to highlight, or what's missing, and they're color coded, and then put your comment, and then your neighbors can see them and like or dislike them. So it's a way for us to get more voices in and get reactions to them.
Yes, so here are the ones we have currently, and please feel free to add your own photos, or if you don't have a photo, you can just add a comment, or even just come on and like ones that you see. If you're not going to make your own comments, you can agree or disagree with the ones that are already here.
And we hope you'll tell your neighbors about this too. Sorry, Daphne, to interrupt you, but please share what you heard tonight, and especially share the Lexington Next and the social pinpoint opportunity with your neighbors and people you see in Lexington who may not have attended the forum. Go ahead, Daphne.
So Ben has told us that his kids will love the ideas wall. That's great too. Someone is concerned that we said that you need to be present and then we let winners win. I think the thinking was that we said we would stop at 9 and we went over so much that it was unfair to them. If that's all right with you. There'll be other opportunities. So thank you again.
Thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you so much. Good night.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.